sold to a trapper in the high mountains for a pelt. A cowboy crossed the pass and gave her a valley of her own. The axle pin was cold enough to burn my fingers when I pulled it free. I'd been lying under that wagon for maybe 20 minutes, my back flat on the frozen ground, the sky the color of a dead fire through the spokes above me. And the only thing I knew for certain was that if I didn't get that pin seated before dark, I was going to spend the night on Calder's Pass with nothing between me and whatever came down off those high slopes after sundown. My name is Court Wells. I was 53 years old that winter, and I want to say that clearly because it matters to what I'm going to tell you. Not 53 the way some men carry it, soft and settled. 53 the way a fence post carries years, standing, still useful, shaped by what the weather made of it. I had driven cattle up the eastern slope of the 10-mile range 4 times, and I had never once not gotten through. That was not a boast. It was just a fact I carried the same way I carried the weight of a good rope. You know it's there, you trust it, you don't think about it until you need it. I got the pin seated, climbed out from under the wagon with creek ice in my beard and gravel in the back of my collar, and I stood up and put my hand on the wheel to make sure it was sound. That's when I heard the sound from the other side of the pass. Not wind I knew, this was wheels. A rig coming down the far side, and coming fast enough to be careless or desperate, one of the two. I went to the box for my rifle, not because I was looking for trouble, but because a man alone on Calder's Pass in the first week of December who doesn't go for his rifle when he hears a fast-moving rig coming out of the dark is a man with a short future. They came out of the tree line at a trot, a mule team, the near mule lathered to the chest. The wagon was loaded heavy with pelts. You could smell them from 20 yards, that thick, wet smell of beaver and marten that gets into your nose and stays. Driving was a man I didn't know. Big across the shoulders, a face that had healed wrong in a couple of places. He saw me and pulled up hard. There was a woman in the box beside him. I noticed her the way you notice something that doesn't fit. She was young, not a girl, but young, and she was sitting absolutely still in a way that had nothing to do with calm. Her hands were in her lap and her jaw was set, and she was looking straight ahead, not at me, not at the driver, straight out into the dark where the trail ran east toward the low country. The man on the box said, "You Wells." I said I was. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, held it out. I didn't move toward it right away, something about the set of his shoulders, like a man who'd already decided how this went. "Harlan Pruitt," he said. "I trapped the upper Blackrock drainage. Your outfit, the Bascom crew, your trail boss sent word you might be coming through." I walked forward and took the paper, a letter from Ed Bascom in a hand I recognized. Short. Said Pruitt had helped the crew 2 winters back when they'd lost a wheel at altitude. Said if I came through and Pruitt had a need, I should hear him out. I handed it back. "What's the need?" I said. Pruitt's eyes cut sideways for just a moment, not to the woman, to the Pelts, then back to me. "I'm in a bind," he said. I waited. You learn that. A man who wants something from you will fill silence faster than you will. "I've got a debt east of the range. Collateral I need to see placed somewhere safe before I go deal with it. The woman's Vera Dunn. Her father's place is out on the Cutter Flats, you know it." I knew of it. The Dunn homestead sat maybe 8 miles from my spread in the flat country below the mountains. Old Silas Dunn, a farmer who'd been failing at that ground for 12 years. "She can't ride with you," I said. "I need the space in the box." I looked at him, he looked back at me. "For Pelts," I said. "That's right." Something had gone still inside me, the way things go still right before you have to do something you didn't plan on doing. I looked at the woman again. She still hadn't moved, still looking east. Her breath made small, even clouds in the cold air. "What does she say?" I said. Pruitt's jaw tightened. It ain't her decision to make. That landed. The way a flat stone lands on frozen ground, solid, with a sound that carries. I looked at her then, not at him. "Ma'am, you want to ride with me or with him?" The first thing she did was look at Pruitt, not with fear exactly. More the way a person looks at a thing they've calculated already, measured it, decided. Then she looked at me. "With you," she said. Her voice was steady, not grateful, not relieved. Steady the way a person is steady when they've decided that one bad situation is better than another, and they're not going to pretend it's more than that. Pruitt said, "Now hold on." She said her piece, I told him. He looked at me for a long moment. The cold was serious now, the kind that gets in under your coat if you stand still too long. His mule team was restless, wanting to move. He had debts east of the range, according to himself, and he had a load of pelts that mattered more to him than whatever claim he thought he had on this woman. He got down from the box. I stepped back just enough. He went to the back of the wagon and pulled out a single saddlebag, not a large one, and he came forward and held it out to her. She took it. He climbed back on the box without another word to either of us, shook the reins, and the mule team moved east. Inside a minute, the sound of the wagon was gone into the dark. I stood there with her and the cold and my rifle and a situation I hadn't planned on. "I know your name," I said. "Court Wells. I've got a spread below the 10-mile other side of the pass. I'll take you to your father's place in the morning if that's where you want to go. Tonight I can offer you a fire and something to eat and nothing else you didn't ask for." She looked at me, measuring again the way she'd measured Prout. "All right," she said. That was the beginning of it. I didn't know it then. I thought it was just a thing that happened on a pass in the cold, one of those crossroads that a person's life is full of and that don't look like much at the time. I thought I was doing a decent thing and then going home. I had a cold camp set in the lee of a rock face about 50 yards off the trail where the wind didn't reach. I'd made it 2 nights before when I came up through from the valley, and there was still wood enough in the stack to build a decent fire. We didn't talk much that first night. She sat close to the fire with the saddlebag in her lap, and I made coffee and heated beans and cut some elk jerky I'd been carrying since Millard's station, and that was supper. She ate without comment. Not the way a person eats when they're hungry and grateful, the way a person eats when they're determined to keep their strength up. There's a difference. I noticed it. After a while she said, "How long have you had the spread?" 9 years, I said. "Alone?" "My wife died 7 years back." She nodded. She didn't say she was sorry, which I appreciated. People say that, and mostly it doesn't mean anything. It just fills the air. She just nodded and looked at the fire. "What's on the Cutter Flats place?" I said. "Your father well?" A pause. "He was when I left it." "When was that?" 4 months ago." She said it flat without elaborating, and I heard what was under the flatness well enough to not ask more. I gave her my bedroll. I had a second blanket, and I was warm enough. She lay down with her back to the fire and her face to the dark, and she was asleep inside 10 minutes, which told me either she was exhausted beyond the point of caring where she slept, or she had decided I was safe, and either way it wasn't something that needed my comment. I sat up another hour, feeding the fire, listening to the pass. The wolves were up on the north ridge, a small pack working something. The wind had dropped off to nothing. The stars above the rock face were sharp and closed the way they get at altitude in December, the kind of sky that reminds you exactly how small a fire is. I thought about what Prout had said, collateral he'd called her, said it the way a man says a word when he's used to saying it, when the word has stopped meaning anything to him except the function it performs. It made me think of a dog I'd had once that went over to a neighbor who owed me a debt, and I thought, there it is. That's the measure of the man. I didn't feel noble about taking her with me. I want to be plain about that. I didn't feel like I'd done something remarkable. I felt like I'd done the only thing a decent person could do, which is a different thing entirely. Remarkable is when you choose against your own nature. This was just my nature. In the morning she was awake before I was, which also told me something. She had the fire going again from the coals and the coffee pot was on. I came up on one elbow and looked at her, and she said, "There's still grounds from last night." I rinsed the pot. "That'll do," I said. I sat up and found my boots and looked east. The pass above us was clear, the high peaks sharp in the early light, some snow on them, but the trail showed dry. Good day for the crossing. "You know the done place," she said. It wasn't a question. "I know of it." "My father bartered me," she said. She said it the way she'd said everything, looking at the fire, her voice level. "To Prout, for enough on his debt to keep him through winter." Prout had a pelt coming to him, and he thought I was close enough. I didn't say anything. "I'm not telling you for your sympathy," she said. "I'm telling you because you're going to hear something different when you take me down into the valley, and I'd rather you heard the truth first." "All right," I said. "I don't want to go back to my father's place." I looked at her. "I know you offered it," she said. "I'm telling you I don't want it." "All right," I said again. She looked at me then. First time she'd looked at me straight on in daylight, and I saw that she was older than I'd thought in the dark, not old, not even close, but not a girl. Maybe 30, maybe a little more. Her eyes were the color of creek water under overcast, gray with a brownish tint that changed in the light. She had a cut on her lower lip, healed but recent, and her left hand, the one wrapped around the coffee cup, had a bruise across the back of it in the yellow phase. "What do you want?" I said. She thought about that, looked back at the fire. "Work," she said. "Somewhere I can work and be let alone to do it." "I can pay wages," I said. "I've got a cook shack and a second room in the main house that's been empty since my wife. Nothing fancy." She looked at me again, that measuring look. "You live alone on this spread." "I do. And you're offering me a room in the main house and wages, and the right to be let alone." "That's right." "Why?" I thought about it. "Because it's what's needed," I said, "and because you said your piece on the pass when you didn't have to. Could have gone with him and waited for a better chance. You made a choice." Something moved in her face. Not warmth exactly. Recognition, maybe. Like a person who's been told the same lie in many different ways and has just now heard something that wasn't a lie. "All right," she said. We broke camp and crossed the pass with the sun behind us, and the valley spread out below like something a man might have made if he'd had time and patience enough to get it right. Brown grassland and the silver line of the creek, and the dark shapes of the ponderosas on the south-facing slopes, and my place sitting in the middle of it with its back to the ridge, solid and low and permanent. She rode on the seat beside me, and she didn't say much. But at some point, coming down off the switchback where the trail leveled out and the valley opened up properly, I saw her take a long breath. Slow and deliberate, like a person taking inventory of something that might be theirs if they let themselves believe it. The crew I had that winter was small. 3 men. Lute Reardon, who had been with me 6 years and who would have driven a herd into the mouth of hell if I asked him to. Dewey Pace, young and willing and still learning what patience was for. And old Mick Calloway, who had been trail cooking since before most of the county was settled, and who had opinions about everything and kept them mostly to himself, which was rare and valuable. I brought her in, said her name was Vera Dunn. She was going to cook and keep the house, and that was that. Lute nodded. Dewey stared until Lute put an elbow in his ribs. Mick looked at her the way he looked at most things, like a man who was building a permanent opinion and didn't intend to be hurried. She looked around the kitchen, the stove, the shelves, the pots. The way the morning light came through the east window, she didn't say anything. Then she asked where I kept the flour. That was the beginning of the real thing, though I wouldn't have called it that then. I would have called it just the ordinary days. She cooked and kept the house, and I ran the spread, and we moved around each other with the careful courtesy of 2 people who are both very good at being self-sufficient, and have no particular appetite for imposing on someone else's space. The men ate better than they had in years. That was the first change. Mick was a competent trail cook, not a great one, and Vera cooked the way some people work a good rope economically without wasted motion, with a knowledge of what she was doing that you could feel in the result. Dewey started finding reasons to come into the kitchen early. Lute drank his coffee slower, small changes. But in a working outfit, small changes are how you read the weather. She repaired the east window latch the second week without telling me she was going to do it. I came in and it was done, the wood tight, the hardware seated properly, and she was back at the stove and didn't mention it. I went and looked at it. She'd used the right gauge nail, seated it clean. That night at supper I said, "Window latch holds." "It was letting cold in," she said. "Noticed." That was all, but it was something. There were 3 of them who came in January. I was out at the far corral when Dewey came running across the yard with his hat in his hand, moving fast. I read his face from 30 yards out. "3 men at the house," he said when he reached me. "Don't know 'em, they asked for the woman." I didn't ask more questions. I put the gate chain on the corral and walked. They were in the yard, their horses tied at the rail, when I came around the corner of the barn. 3 men, 2 of them I didn't know. The third one I recognized by his size and the way his face had healed wrong in certain places. "Prude." He was off his horse and standing in front of the porch. Vera was in the doorway. She wasn't hiding behind the door, she was standing in it. Prude saw me coming and he turned. "Wells," he said. "Prude, I came for what's mine." I walked until I was between him and the porch and I stopped. I didn't hurry it. I walked at the pace I'd been walking all my life, and I stopped where I needed to stop, and I let him read whatever he wanted into it. "She's not yours," I said. "Her father sold her to me. Her father didn't own her to sell." One of the other men shifted on his horse. I knew where Dewey was, behind me to the right, near the water trough. Loot would be coming from the barn. Mick was probably inside. I didn't look. You don't look when you're reading a man the way I was reading Prout. "I have a paper," Prout said. "Papers don't make something right." He looked at me for a while. I had about 4 inches on him in some years, but Prout was the kind of big that comes from work, not fat, and his hands were the size of roof shingles. He was calculating. I could see him doing it, the same way I'd calculated him on the pass. "You want trouble over a woman that ain't yours either," he said. "She chose where she wanted to be," I said. "She said so on the pass. You heard her same as I did. Choosing ain't the same as owning." "No," I said, "it's better." He looked at me a long time. His jaw worked. The man on his right was young, and he had the hands of someone who'd used them for violence before, the kind of stillness that comes from practice. I filed that away. "I've got rights here," Prout said. "No, you don't," I said. "You've got a paper with a farmer's name on it, and that doesn't buy you anything on my land. You want to talk about your debt with Sila's Dunn, you go talk to Sila's Dunn. But you're on my property, and you've been told what's what, and I'd advise you to consider whether what you think you're owed is worth what this costs." He understood me. That's the thing about men like Prout. They respect force, and they understand it, and they know when it's real and when it's performance. I wasn't performing. He stood there for another half-minute, long enough to save face in front of his men. Then he turned, slow, and he went to his horse and he got on it. "This ain't finished," he said. "Next time you ride onto this property without an invitation, I won't be this polite," I said. They rode out. I stood there until the sound of them was gone east down the creek road. Then I turned around. She was still in the doorway. Her face was steady, the same way it had been on the pass. But her right hand was at her side and her fingers were open, which is what hands do when they've been very tight for a while and have just now relaxed. She looked at me. "Thank you," she said. It was the first time she'd said it to me like that, not politely, not as a courtesy, but straight, like she meant it right down to the ground. "You're on my property," I said. "I take care of what's on my property." It wasn't a soft thing to say, but she didn't need soft, she needed true. The cold broke in the second week of February, the way it sometimes does in the 10-mile country, not with warmth exactly, but with a different quality of cold. A thin cold rather than a deep one, and the light started coming back into the days, the way color comes back into something that's been in shadow too long. I noticed her more in that light. I'd noticed her all along, which I'm not going to pretend otherwise. A man living alone for 7 years notices a woman in his house. That is just honest. But the noticing had been quiet, filed away, not allowed to run. She was there because she needed to be there, not because I had any claim on her or any expectations, and I had been very deliberate about that. But in the February light I noticed more, the way she thought about things before she said them. The way she was with the horses, she had started working with the string on her own time, nothing I asked for, just because they were there and she understood them and they understood her. Dewey had told me that she could read a horse's mood better than most hands he'd seen. I hadn't said anything to that, but I'd remembered it. She was competent, not in the way that people are competent when they're trying to prove something, in the way that comes from years of quiet work, from having figured out on your own what works and what doesn't. The kind of competence that doesn't announce itself. I had been alone long enough to know that there are different kinds of alone. There is the alone of a man who has decided not to want anything, and there is the alone of a man who still wants things but has accepted that they're not coming. They feel similar from the inside, but they are not the same thing. The first one is a kind of peace. The second one is just waiting. I had thought I was the first kind. I was starting to understand I was the second. One evening in late February, I was at the table with the ranch books. I did them every Saturday, end of the week, and she brought coffee without being asked, the way she'd started doing, and she set it down and she looked at the books and she said, "You're short on your fence wire for the north pasture." I looked up. "I saw your order sheet," she said. "What you ordered against what you marked in the ledger, you're 20 coils short." I looked at the books. She was right. I'd transcribed wrong from the order sheet the way you do when you're tired. You read ledgers, I said. My father's farm, she said. He couldn't, I did. I looked at the books, then at her. You want a second set of eyes on these, she said. I don't mind. I thought about that for a moment. Not because I had any question about the answer, because I was aware of what it meant, and I wanted to be sure before I said it. I'd appreciate that, I said. She sat down across from me and she pulled the ledger around and she went over it the way she went over everything, careful, economical, without hurry. She found 2 more errors, one in my favor, one not. She marked them both. We worked through most of the book. The lamp was low when we finished and the fire had settled down to coals. She was still looking at the last page when I said, "You're comfortable here." She looked up. "I mean it as a question," I said. "I know," she said. She put her hands flat on the table, looked at them. "I didn't know how comfortable could feel," she said, "in a place. I thought comfortable meant you weren't miserable. I didn't know it could mean more than that." I didn't say anything. "This valley," she said, "the way it sits in the mountains, the way it's yours, the way things work here because you made them work." She was quiet for a moment. "I thought places like this were things other people had." "You're here," I said. "I know I'm here." She looked up at me then, straight. "I'm trying to tell you that it means something to me, that it's not nothing, that I'm not just running through on my way somewhere else." "I know that," I said. "Do you?" "I think I know you well enough by now to know that," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. The lamp was low. The coals made a ticking sound as they settled. Outside, a horse blew softly in the corral, one of the mares, who sometimes made that sound when the night was particularly still. Then she said, "What do you want, Court?" Nobody had asked me that in a very long time. 7 years, maybe longer. My wife had known what I wanted without asking, which was a particular kind of knowing that you lose when you lose the person who had it. After that, I had just been a man with a spread to run and work to do and years to get through, and the question of what I wanted had seemed like something that didn't apply anymore. "I want this," I said. "What it already is, I want you to have a reason to stay." She nodded slowly, like I'd said something she'd been waiting to see if I'd say. "I'm not easy to know," she said. "I noticed. I don't trust fast. I know. I don't need someone to take care of me," she said. "I need someone to," she stopped, thought about it. "Work alongside, see the same things." "I know that too," I said. She looked at the ledger, then at me. "All right," she said. It was the same word she'd used on the pass on that first morning when I'd offered her a room and wages and the right to be let alone. But it meant something different now. Same word, different weight. The kind of difference that makes a man understand that certain things are being decided. Spring in the Tenmal is not a gentle thing. It's a tearing. The creek comes down off the mountains like it's got something to prove, and the bottomland floods and the mud is serious. And there's always at least 1 week when it seems like winter changed its mind and came back. It takes a certain type of person to see the beauty in it. She saw it. I'd see her out in the early morning, standing at the east end of the yard with a coffee cup in her hands, watching the water come up in the lower pasture. And there was something in the way she stood, settled, attentive, like a person who has decided that the view belongs to them by right of looking. Prout came back once more in March, just him alone without his men. He came to the front of the house and he sat his horse and he said he wanted to talk. I came out without the rifle. A man who comes alone and says he wants to talk is usually either brave or done with fighting, and I had to figure out which. He said, "I went to see Dunn." I waited. "He's bad off," Prout said. "Worse than I knew. I don't think he's going to make it to next winter." I said nothing. "I want to square the debt," he said. "Whatever I thought I had coming, it was wrong to call it what I called it on the pass. I'd had a drink and I was short on money and I wasn't thinking straight." He looked at the mountains, then back at me. "I'm telling you because I figure you'll tell her, and because I want it said out loud." I studied him for a long moment. Men are complicated. I have known very bad men who had one good thing in them and very good men who had one bad thing. Prout was somewhere in the middle, a rough man who had done a wrong thing and who had enough left in him to say so. "I'll tell her," I said. He nodded. He started to turn his horse. "Prout." He stopped. Her father, I said. If he needs something, come tell me. He looked at me. You do that, he said. She'd want it, I said, so yes. He rode out. I didn't know if I'd see him again. I didn't know if I wanted to. But a man closes doors that need closing and leaves open the ones that ought to stay open, and I thought that one ought to stay open. I told her that evening. She was at the stove and she listened without turning around. When I was done, she was quiet for a while. My father's a weak man, she said. He was weak before my mother died and worse after. I'm not saying that with hate, it's just what he is. I know, I said. I don't want to go back there. I'm not asking you to. She turned then, but if he needs help, she said. I'll see to it. She looked at me for a long moment. You do that for a man who bartered his daughter for a winter's debt. I'd do it for you, I said. Something came into her eyes that I hadn't seen before. Not the measuring, not the steadiness. Something more like the way water looks when the sun hits it at the right angle, that sudden, unguarded flash. She crossed the kitchen floor. She put her hand on my arm. Her hand was warm from the stove, and she held my arm with a deliberateness that was not casual. She didn't grab or clutch. She held. The way you hold onto something solid when the ground has been unsteady under you for a long time. She looked up at me. You're a good man, Court Wells, she said, low and plain and without performance. The way something is said when it has been thought through and decided on, and the person saying it means every syllable. I put my hand over hers. Her hand was small and strong, and there were calluses at the base of her fingers from work, and that was the truest thing I could say about her. That she was a woman who had calluses from work and still had her whole hands, and that was more dignity than most people managed to keep. I've got a valley, I said, if you want it. She smiled. First time I want to say that, first time I'd seen it clearly, though there had been suggestions of it before, small things at the edge of her mouth. It was not a large smile. It was the kind that a person who doesn't smile easily makes when something has genuinely gotten through, and it was worth more for its rarity. I want it, she said. I will tell you what I know about working alongside someone. Really working alongside, the way I mean it. It is not the same as having help. Help is someone doing the tasks that are under your authority and you directing them. Working alongside is when you stop being the only one who sees the whole picture. When someone else starts finishing your sentences in the practical sense. You're out looking at the north fence line, and you come back, and the thing you were going to say about the gate is already done. When you stop having to explain the reasoning because they've been watching the same things you've been watching, and they've drawn the same conclusions. That's what it became through that spring. She knew the spread by the end of April better than Dewey did, and Dewey had been there 3 years, not just the house, the land. She'd walk the creek with me when I was checking the water rights markers, and she'd ask about the things that seemed out of place to her, and her questions were good questions, the kind that open up into more thinking rather than just getting answered and going away. Lute watched it all from a respectful distance and said nothing. Mick said, "That woman's got more sense than most men I've known, and I've known a considerable number." That was high praise from Mick. I thanked him, and he said he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to Dewey, who'd made some comment I hadn't heard, and Dewey turned red to the ears. One morning in May, I was at the front of the house before first light. That was my habit. I'd been doing it for years, walking out in the dark just before dawn to look at the valley and listen to it and be alone with it for 10 minutes before the day started. I was particular about that. The men knew it and stayed in the bunkhouse until I was back. She was there, standing right where I usually stood at the east end of the porch, looking out at the black shape of the mountains and the first faint gray in the sky above them. Coffee in her hand. I stopped. She heard me and turned. "I hope this is all right," she said. "It is," I said. I went and stood beside her. Not close, there was room between us. We stood and watched the gray come up and the mountains take shape out of it, ridge by ridge, the snow still on the high ones catching the first color before the valley did. She said, "I used to think about what it would be like to stand somewhere and feel like you owned it." "Not owned," I said, "just belonged to." She thought about that. "Yes," she said. "That's the word." The light was coming in earnest now, the cold blue of early morning that makes everything look very far away and very clear at the same time. The creek caught it. The corral fence made a line of light across the near pasture. A hawk came off the south ridge and worked the updraft over the lower meadow without moving its wings, just holding there, reading the air. "I never had a valley," she said. "You do now," I said. She turned to look at me. In the morning light, her face was plain and sure, and she looked at me the way that a person looks at something they're no longer just hoping for, the way you look at something when you know it's real. She moved toward me, not quickly, and she put her head against my shoulder and she stood there. Just stood there in the early morning, with the valley coming light around us, and the mountains going gold at the tops, and the hawk still working the updraft below. I put my arm around her. She was solid and real, and she was warm even in the cold air, and she didn't lean the way a person leans who needs holding up. She leaned the way a person leans who has chosen where they want to stand, and this is the place. We stood there long enough that the light got into the valley proper, the full morning light, and the hands started moving in the bunkhouse, and the horses were up at the fence wanting water. The day came in around us. There was work to do. There was always work to do. But for that minute right there, with the valley lit and the mountains still cold at the tops, and this woman's weight against my shoulder, chosen. I want to say that clearly, not trapped, not obligated, chosen. For that minute I was a man who had everything a man could reasonably want. I had been alone a long time. I had done good work and I had kept the land and I had gotten through the years. But that is not the same thing as being valued by someone who could have looked at you and looked away. Someone who measured you and stayed. She had measured me on a cold pass in December, and she had said the word that mattered, and she had never once said it halfway. That is not a small thing. I knew men who had never had it. The ranch was good, the valley was good, the work was good. And she was here. The summer that followed was the best one I'd had in years. Not because of any particular remarkable thing, no great event, no sudden change. The cattle were healthy and the grass came in thick on the south pasture, and we finished the north fence before the first heat and the hay was good. Ordinary things. The kind of things that make a working spread sound and a working man feel useful. She ran the house and kept the books, and she worked the horses on days when the weather was right. And on 2 occasions she rode with me all the way up to the summer range, which was not something I'd ever done with anyone since my wife. It's a long ride. 12 miles up into the high meadows where the summer grass is, where you go to check on the herd in June and move them down before October. The kind of ride where you don't talk much because the country does the talking. She sat her horse well. She watched the country the way I watched it, the way I'd watched it for years, looking for what was wrong before it got worse, reading what the grass was telling you, noting the water. On the second trip, she pointed out a section of the meadow fence that was down before I saw it. I said nothing. She said nothing. We got down and fixed it. On the ride back, she said, "Your wife, did she ride with you?" "Yes," I said. "Did she like it up here?" "She did," I said. "More than I expected. She came from town originally. But she learned the country fast." "What was she like?" I thought about it. "Steady," I said. "Patient in a way I'm not always patient. She made this place a real home, not just a place to work from. I don't know if I understood that until after she was gone." Vera nodded. The trail was narrow there, and we were in single file, her behind me, and I couldn't see her face. "I'm not trying to be her," she said. "I know that. I just want to know about the person who came before me, who the place belonged to before." "It belongs to itself," I said. She would have said the same thing. The land doesn't belong to the people on it, they belong to it. She taught me that, actually. Or I learned it because she was here, and I was paying attention. We came out of the timber onto the bench above the valley, and the whole spread was below us, small and whole and right. "She sounds like a good woman," Vera said. "She was." "Then you know how to be with a good woman," she said. "You did it before." I turned in the saddle to look at her. Her face was plain and she was looking out at the valley below us, and there was something in the way she said it, not a question, not quite a statement, something in between. Like a person reading a map and noting that the road goes where they need it to go. "I do," I said. She looked at me then, one short nod, the kind that means, "Good, that's settled." We rode down into the valley in the evening light. There are things about a man's life at 53 that are hard to explain to someone who hasn't gotten there yet. The young men I knew, Dewey's age, mid-20s, they looked at the future like it was a country they were going to ride into. Wide open, unknown, anything possible. I remember being that way. I don't say I miss it because I don't think missing it is honest. What you gain by 53 is worth what you lose. What you gain is knowing the difference between what matters and what doesn't. I am not talking about wisdom in the preacher's sense. I am talking about something more practical than that. The small aggravations that used to cost me sleep, a hand who quit without notice, a season that ran wrong, a piece of equipment that failed at the wrong time. By 53, they had the weight they actually deserved, which was less. And the things that were genuinely rare, a good horse, a solid piece of ground, a clear day in November, a person who meant what they said, those things had the weight they actually deserved, which was more. I thought about that in the evenings that summer. After supper, when the men had gone to the bunkhouse and the house was quiet, I sometimes sat on the porch with the last of the day's light and thought about the shape of things. The way you get when you're tired but not ready to sleep yet. She usually had something going still, the books or the mending or a letter she was writing. I could see the lamp through the window, the light of it on the porch floor, yellow and steady. I'd sit there and listen to the small sounds of the house doing what a house does at the end of a day, and I'd know she was in there, and something about that was different from the years before in a way that I wasn't going to pretend I didn't notice. One evening in late June, she came out with her own coffee and sat in the other chair. We'd gotten to that 2 chairs on the porch without discussing it. Things were like that between us. We didn't negotiate much. We just noticed what the situation wanted and did it. We sat there and it got dark, and neither of us felt the need to fill it. After a while she said, "My father's worse." Prude had sent word through a hand at Millard's station. I'd gotten it that afternoon. I had been deciding how to tell her or whether to wait until morning when she was rested. She'd apparently gotten there herself. "I know," I said. "You were going to tell me. In the mornings." She was quiet for a moment. The morning wouldn't have been better. "No," I said, "probably not." "I don't want to go to him," she said. "I want to say that clearly. I have already grieved what that man was supposed to be to me. And I did it a long time ago, and going to sit by a bed and wait for him to go is not something I can do without it doing something to me that would take too long to come back from." She said it clearly, the way she said everything that was true, like a person reading from something they'd already written inside themselves. "All right," I said. "But I don't want him to die without someone there," she said. "I'll send Lute," I said. "He's a decent man and he won't make it strange." She looked at me. "You'd spare Lute Reardon for that," she said. "Middle of the summer. For a week maybe, Mick and Dewey and I can manage." She looked out at the dark. The creek was up, talking to itself somewhere in the cottonwoods at the bottom of the yard. Some nights you could hear it clearly. Tonight was one of those nights. "Why do you keep doing that?" she said. "What?" "Seeing what I need before I ask for it." I thought about that. "My wife," I said. "She used to say that caring about someone isn't a feeling, it's a practice. You do it the same way you maintain a good saddle, regular, particular, before it needs it." I thought she was being practical in a way that took the feeling out of it. I was wrong. That was the feeling, that was the whole of it. She didn't say anything for a while. "She was a smart woman," she said finally. "She was." The creek talked on. An owl was working the cottonwoods. You could hear it when the creek went quiet between runs. The mountains were a black shape against a sky full of stars and a half-moon that was just up over the eastern ridge. "You've been good to me," she said. "From the first night, you didn't have to be." "You're easy to be good to," I said. "That's not a small thing. I've known people who weren't." She made a small sound, not quite a laugh, more like the audible version of a thought that landed unexpected. "I'm not always easy," she said. "No, but you're honest, and you pull your weight and then some, and when you say something, you mean it." I paused. "Those 3 things together, that's rare. You work alongside people for years and you don't always get all 3. She was quiet again. I could feel her sitting with it, not dismissing it, not deflecting, just taking it in with that particular thoroughness of hers. "Court," she said. "Yeah. I think I'd like to stay." I looked at her. "Past the winter," she said. "Past whatever the practical reason was. I'd like to stay because I want to be here if that's all right with you." "It's more than all right," I said. She nodded slowly, the finality kind, not the thinking it over kind. We sat there a while longer, long enough that the moon was fully up and the yard was all moon shadows, the fence posts throwing long lines toward the barn, the water trough a bright flat square in the middle of the yard. I thought about the years before, the particular silence of a house without anyone in it. The way you get used to silence until you stop hearing it, and then someone comes and the silence is gone, and you realize it had been there all along and it had been heavy. Her lamp was still on in the window, yellow and steady. I thought, I am 53 years old and I have a good spread in a good valley and a woman sitting beside me who means what she says and wants to stay. That is not what I expected this part of life to look like. I had laid the expectation down years ago, the way you lay down a tool you don't think you'll need anymore, and left it somewhere and walked on. Somewhere back there in those years, that laid down thing, and now this. I was not going to say something sentimental about it. I'm not built that way, and I knew she didn't want it. What I felt was quieter and more solid than sentiment. It was the feeling of something that had been unlevel getting level, a thing settling into its right place with the specific small sound that right things make. Good, I said just that. She said good back. And that was that. I want to tell you about a day in August because I think it is the truest thing I have. We had been haying. 3 days of it, the whole crew, the cutting and the turning and the loading and the stacking, that particular exhaustion that gets into your hands and your back and your shoulders and just stays there for a week. The last load was in by late afternoon on the 3rd day, and I sent the hands to the bunkhouse and told them supper wasn't for 2 hours and they should rest. I was in the barn putting up the mower when she came in. She had 2 cups of cold water from the well, and she handed me one and I drank it down without stopping, and she did the same with hers. We were both dirty. The cut hay was in our hair and our clothes, and the dust of the field was in the creases at our eyes and on our necks. We smelled like work, both of us. There was nothing tidy or presented about any of it. She sat down on the bench along the stall wall, her elbows on her knees, looking at the floor. I sat beside her. We were both too tired to talk, and neither of us was trying to. After a while she said, "The valley's good this year." "It is," I said. "The hay came in better than I expected." That south meadow I was worried about. "You mentioned it in April." "I know," a pause, "you listened." "I always listen," I said. She turned her head and looked at me. Close. We were close on that bench, our shoulders nearly touching, both of us worn through from 3 days of real work. "I know you do," she said. "That's what I mean. There are things that happen between people that you can't quite put into words because the words are smaller than the thing. What happened on that bench in the barn in the August heat, both of us dirty and worn out, was one of those things. It wasn't large. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a woman who had been used as a traded thing, who had been alone in her own particular way for longer than I'd known her, who had measured a man on a cold pass and decided he was worth her trust, telling him that she saw him, that he had been seen. I put my hand on the back of her neck. She leaned into it just slightly. Her neck was warm, and there was a small cut there from where a piece of hay had caught her, and she'd never mentioned it. She looked at me. "You're the best man I know, Court," she said, low and level the way she said the things that were true. "I've known men who did more and mattered less." I didn't have a word for what that did to a man who had been alone for 7 years, and who had told himself that he was all right with what he had. I just know that it was the kind of thing you carry for the rest of your life. That particular sentence, said on that bench, in that light. "I'm glad I crossed the pass," I said. She smiled, that same rare smile. "So am I," she said. Outside, the valley was going gold in the late light. The horses were at the fence. Somewhere up on the ridge a hawk called once, and the sound of it came down through the still August air and disappeared. She was here, that was the sum of it. Everything I had built and kept and worked for, and at the end of it, this woman, who had stood in a doorway and said her word and meant it, who had chosen where she wanted to be and had never chosen halfway, this woman was here. I have thought sometimes about the thing Prout said on the pass, early on. Choosing ain't the same as owning, he'd said. He was trying to diminish something, trying to say that a thing freely given was worth less than a thing taken. I understood now why he was wrong about that, and it wasn't complicated. A thing taken is just a thing you have. It sits there. It owes you nothing and you owe it nothing, and there is no warmth in it, no meaning, just possession. A thing freely given is a different creature entirely. Every day you know it was a choice. Every day it could be otherwise, and it isn't because someone decided it wouldn't be. That's not just a thing you have, that's a life. I was 53 years old and I had a valley, and I had a woman who had crossed a cold pass with nothing but a saddlebag, and had measured me in the dark, and decided I was worth her loyalty and her work and her choosing. There is no word for what that is except the right one. The valley was ours, and we had earned it, both of us, and the morning was coming in the way it does in August on the 10-mile, pink at the edges first, then full, then the whole long golden day ahead. Work to do. Good work, the kind that means something when it's done, and her here. Still here. That's the whole of it.